Prepare to embark on a thrilling journey into the heart of the wild, where survival hangs by a thread. In this gripping collection of true encounters, witness the harrowing moments when humans cross paths with nature's most formidable predators. From the dense forests of Siberia to the rugged shores of Kodiak Island, these stories reveal the raw power of grizzly and polar bears as they confront unsuspecting adventurers. As tension mounts and danger lurks in every shadow, discover who will emerge victorious and who will fall prey to the untamed wilderness. Join us as we delve into the chilling realities of life on the edge. On May 7, 2025, Tanya and Alexei, seasoned travelers with an adventurous spirit, had planned their trip to Siberia's remote wilderness months in advance. The $200,000 camper van they owned was their pride and joy, customized to perfection for life on the road. After enduring months of city noise, they parked beside a quiet river in the wild heart of Russia's Far East, eager to bask in the isolation and beauty of the land. Unbeknownst to them, the peaceful evening would soon be shattered by a force of nature far more powerful than their van's steel frame. A grizzly, massive and ravenous after a long hibernation, had been roaming the forest in search of food. The scent of the couple's meal drifted through the trees, drawing the animal closer without their awareness. Driven by instinct, the bear followed the trail and reached the van just as night began to settle over the wilderness. Tanya was rinsing the last of the dishes when a faint rustling in the underbrush caught her attention. It was subtle but unnerving, enough to still her movements. A silent glance passed between her and Alexei, an unspoken acknowledgement that something was wrong. The sound intensified, culminating in the sudden crack of splintering wood. The van jolted violently and Tanya's heart skipped a beat. As she turned toward the noise, the grizzly's enormous face emerged through the bushes, its eyes locked on the vehicle with feral intent. Alexei reacted swiftly, reaching for the axe they kept by the door, but the bear was already upon them. With terrifying speed and strength, it crashed into the side of the van. Metal groaned under its weight as claws tore through the thick exterior, shredding the door like paper. Tanya's breath caught as she stumbled backward in shock. Alexei tried to pull her further away, but the bear closed the distance with horrifying speed. Before either could think to run, the grizzly's massive paw struck Alexei, sending him sprawling. Tanya lurched forward, reaching for the bear spray, but the beast was already on them. Alexei's agonized cry pierced the night as the bear's jaws clamped onto his shoulder, dragging him down. Tanya, gripped by a surge of terror, grabbed at him in a desperate attempt to free him. Blood spilled onto the earth, dark and fast. The bear wasn't finished. Tanya made a frantic dash into the trees, but the animal was relentless. One powerful swipe sent her crashing to the ground. Her legs were pinned beneath her, pain radiating through her limbs as the bear roared overhead. In that final moment, her eyes met Alexei's, his expression frozen in horror as life left his body. The bear turned its attention back to her, its gaze burning with hunger. She clawed at the ground, dragging herself away, but the bear struck again. Its claws raked across her chest, the agony blinding. Each movement felt like fire searing through her veins. She tried to fight to survive, but the grizzly's brute force overwhelmed her. Her hand searched blindly for the bear spray, her last hope, but she never reached it. With one final brutal swipe, the beast silenced her, its claws tearing into her throat. Nearby, a hiker, exhausted from the day's trek, heard the sounds of the attack. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The screams of the couple echoed through the night, followed by the horrifying growls of the grizzly. Paralyzed by fear, he dared not approach, fully aware of the danger that lay ahead. From a distance, he watched in helpless horror as the bear continued to maul the van, its claws tearing through the wreckage and rummaging through what remained of their belongings. By the time the bear finished its assault, it was well past midnight. The couple's bodies lay motionless, their lives claimed by the very wilderness they had come to explore. Still ravenous, the bear wandered from the van to scavenge the last of their supplies. At one point, it turned back, casting a final, fleeting glance at the destruction it had wrought. Authorities were eventually alerted. After tracking the animal to its den, they made the decision to euthanize it, a move deemed necessary to prevent further attacks. The tragedy sparked widespread discussion about the increasing risks of human encroachment into bear habitats. Some blamed the couple for a lack of caution, while others pointed to the broader issue of human presence disrupting the natural balance, placing both wildlife and travelers in harm's way. The hiker, still shaken by the events he had witnessed, later provided a detailed statement to the authorities. His account painted a vivid and harrowing picture of the attack. The deaths of Tanya and Alexei soon became a turning point in the ongoing debate about wilderness safety. Their story served as a grim reminder of how swiftly nature could strike back when its boundaries were crossed. The Siberian wilderness, for all its beauty and serenity, remained a place where danger lingered in the shadows, waiting for the unwary to stumble into its grip. An experienced hiker and camper, Emily found solace in the solitude of nature, far from the noise and distractions of modern life. For her latest adventure, she had chosen the remote wilderness of Kodiak Island, an area known for its rugged terrain and abundant wildlife. Towering mountains, dense forests, and the endless expanse of water surrounding the island made it the perfect escape. She hoped to reconnect with the land and find peace away from the demands of everyday life. Upon arriving at her campsite near the banks of a quiet river, Emily felt a wave of calm wash over her. After setting up her tent, she gathered firewood, her mind at ease as the rhythmic crackling of the flames began to fill the air. She had no particular agenda, just a few days to herself to hike along the river, explore the island, and sleep beneath the stars. As night settled in, she sat by the fire, the warmth comforting her against the cool evening breeze. She cooked a simple meal and took in the stillness that surrounded her. There were no voices, no traffic, no reminders of the modern world, only the vast silence of the wild. Thoughts of family and friends back home surfaced briefly, but quickly drifted away as she turned her gaze upward, losing herself in the stars. Unbeknownst to her, she was not alone. A Kodiak bear, one of the largest and most powerful bears in the world, had been prowling the area, drawn by the scent of food. The spring had been harsher than usual, and hunger gnawed at the animal, driving it to take risks it might otherwise avoid. Emily heard nothing at first. She remained immersed in the fire's glow, unaware that something monstrous was moving closer. It wasn't until the crunch of leaves reached her ears that her body tensed. The sound grew louder, closer. A sharp chill crept up her spine as she instinctively stopped moving, her senses suddenly alert. The quiet now felt heavy, unnatural. Then she saw it. Just beyond the firelight, the bear emerged from the shadows, huge, silent, and terrifying. Its dark fur seemed to blend with the night, but its eyes caught the firelight, flickering with hunger. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had no weapons, nothing but the bear spray clipped to her belt. Training and preparation had always seemed enough. Until now. The bear snorted and stepped forward. Panic flooded her system, but instinct took over. She couldn't outrun it, and there was nowhere to hide. The bear's head looked nearly as wide as her chest. Its massive claws flexed in anticipation. Emily's hand went to the spray. Her fingers, trembling, fumbled with the safety cap. The bear advanced again and lunged. Its massive paw swung through the air, crashing into her campsite and sending the tent flying. Emily barely had time to react before she felt the claws tear across her side. Pain erupted across her ribs, sharp and blinding. Her scream was lost to the wilderness as she crumpled to the ground, blood seeping through her clothes. Adrenaline surged. She staggered back to her feet, heart pounding, limbs shaking. The bear circled, growling, its breath harsh, its eyes locked on her. It had her cornered. She was hurt, alone, and disoriented. Every instinct urged her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Survival meant standing her ground. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment something passed between them. The bear hesitated, as if weighing its options. Emily's hand clenched tighter around the canister. With a breath that trembled through her whole body, she raised it and took aim. Her thumb pressed down on the trigger. The spray shot out in a powerful stream, striking the bear squarely in the eyes. It recoiled with a guttural growl, stumbling backward. The acrid scent of the chemical filled the air, overpowering the smoke from the campfire. The bear pawed frantically at its face, snarling in frustration. Its aggression suddenly checked. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as the creature shook its head, clearly disoriented and in pain. She didn't hesitate. Fueled by adrenaline, she staggered toward the edge of the campsite, her legs trembling beneath her. The pain in her side flared with every step, but she forced herself forward. Behind her, the bear growled again, quieter now, more uncertain. It hadn't fully retreated, but it had pulled back. Emily kept moving, each breath shallow and ragged. Her grip tightened around the bear spray as she reached a dense thicket nearby, its tangled branches offering scant protection. She crouched low, wincing with every movement, her body drained and bleeding. But the bear didn't follow, for now it had vanished into the forest. Time passed in a blur of pain and vigilance. The shock of the attack began to wear off, replaced by the cold weight of reality. Her side throbbed with each breath, and the blood soaking through her clothes had begun to dry. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She needed help, and soon. The bear had nearly killed her, but she had survived. Barely. She spent the night huddled in the undergrowth, too afraid to sleep, her senses straining for any sound of the predator's return. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind sent her heart racing. The wilderness that had once brought her peace now seemed full of unseen threats. By morning, Emily was barely conscious. Dizzy from blood loss and cold, she forced herself to rise. One agonizing step at a time, she began the long journey toward the trail she had followed days earlier. She didn't know how far she would make it, but she refused to give up. The rescue team found her the following day, stumbling through the underbrush toward the edge of the trail. Her wounds were deep and her body weakened, but she was alive. Against the odds, she had endured the night. Survival had come down to quick thinking and an unyielding will to live. The attack would remain with her forever, a brutal reminder that the wilderness, for all its beauty, could be merciless. Emily had faced the beast of Kodiak Island and lived to tell the tale, but the scars it left behind, both visible and unseen, would never fully fade. In the dense, sprawling forests of Amur Oblast, Officer Sergei Baranov walked the trails alone, his boots crunching softly over the forest floor. The area had become notorious for bear sightings, particularly Russian grizzlies, which were growing more aggressive as their natural food sources dwindled. The Amur region was vast and remote, with miles of wilderness separating tiny villages and towns. It was his job to patrol these trails and ensure the safety of the few brave souls who ventured into the heart of this unforgiving land. Sergei had been a seasoned officer for over a decade. He had seen his fair share of dangerous situations, drug busts, car chases, and even animal encounters, but he had never faced anything quite like this. It was a late afternoon in early spring. Sergei had been walking the trail for hours, his radio crackling softly with updates from his partner Dmitry, who was stationed at a check-in point several miles away. Sergei paused for a moment, wiped sweat from his brow, and looked around. The forest was eerily quiet. Then, from the corner of his eye, Sergei caught a glimpse of movement, too large for any human. He tensed, his instincts kicking in. His hand instinctively reached for his firearm, though he knew he wouldn't be able to use it in time if it came to that. The sight of the massive bear emerged from the underbrush with terrifying speed. The grizzly, its fur matted and dull from winter hibernation, was easily twice Sergei's size. The bear didn't pause. Its black eyes locked onto Sergei, and it charged without hesitation, as though it had been stalking him for hours. Sergei's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts told him to run, but he knew that was futile. Bears were faster than humans, and their claws could tear through flesh with a single swipe. With the bear barreling toward him, he had only one choice: fight. His hand went to the radio, but there was no time. Sergei's training took over, and he took a quick step to the side, narrowly avoiding the first swipe of the bear's claws. The grizzly's momentum carried it forward, but Sergei's heart raced as he saw his opening. He fired a shot into the air, hoping to startle the bear, but the sound only seemed to provoke it further. Its eyes narrowed, and it turned to face him again, angrier than before. The bear lunged, this time with more ferocity. Sergei was too slow to dodge, and the beast's claws caught his side. Blood seeped from the deep gashes in his torso, and the bear's massive paw pressed down on his chest, pinning him to the earth. He struggled, gasping for breath, but the bear's weight was overwhelming. In those desperate moments, Sergei thought of his family, his wife, and his young daughter, and how he might never see them again. He fought harder, his hands scrabbling at the dirt, trying to push the bear off him, but it was no use. The creature's strength was unimaginable, and each time Sergei struggled, the bear pushed harder. A distant voice on the radio crackled again. Dmitry. Sergei barely registered it, his mind fogged with pain and fear. He couldn't respond. He had no strength left. Just as Sergei thought he might lose consciousness, the bear suddenly stopped, growling low in its throat. It stepped back for a moment as if weighing its next move. Sergei, panting and bloodied, could barely lift his head. His entire body ached, and his chest felt like it was on fire from the deep, ragged gashes the bear had left. He knew he had moments before the bear would finish what it had started. That was when Dmitry arrived. The sound of footsteps crashing through the forest grew louder, and Sergei felt a surge of hope. Dmitry had been too far behind to hear the radio call, but he must have realized something was wrong. Sergei heard the quick, rhythmic sound of Dmitry's boots hitting the ground, and then he saw him, his partner, rifle in hand, rushing toward the scene. The bear, startled by the new sound, turned toward Dmitry, its growls echoing through the trees. Sergei, his vision blurry, could barely keep his eyes open. Dmitri raised the rifle, but before he could get off a shot, the bear charged again, moving with frightening speed. Dmitri fired several rounds in rapid succession, the gunshots ringing through the forest, each shot echoing like thunder. The bear hesitated, then recoiled as if the shots had finally made an impact. Dmitri fired again, this time landing a shot that struck the bear in the shoulder. It growled in agony and backed off, its eyes narrowing as it limped into the underbrush, disappearing into the shadows. Sergei lay still, gasping for air. His side burned with every breath, the weight of the bear's attack still pressing on his mind. Dmitri reached him quickly, dropping to his knees beside his partner. The urgency in Dmitri's eyes was clear, but there was little he could do alone. With trembling hands, Dmitri applied pressure to the wound, but it was too late to stop the bleeding. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Dmitri radioed for backup, his voice tight with fear, as Sergei's world began to fade around him. The rescue team arrived just in time, but the damage had been done. Sergei had lost too much blood, and despite the best efforts of the medics, the officer succumbed to his injuries before reaching the hospital. Dmitri, devastated by the loss of his friend, stayed with him until the very end, his own hands stained with the blood of his partner. The rugged backcountry of Wyoming was David's sanctuary. A seasoned hunter, he had spent years learning the land, tracking elk, and mastering the art of survival in the wild. This part of the wilderness, with its towering peaks and thick forests, was familiar ground, a place where David felt at peace. It was early spring, and the ground was still hard from winter's grip, but David knew the elk would be moving soon, drawn to the fresh growth sprouting from the thawing earth. David was alone today. His rifle slung over his shoulder, he made his way through the dense woods, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape for signs of movement. His gear was light. He preferred to travel without encumbrance, and his sharp eyes were trained on every sound, every shift in the forest. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. But today, something felt off. The wind was unusually still, and the air had a weight to it, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. David paused at the edge of a clearing, the dirt beneath his boots soft and moist. The sunlight filtering through the trees was just enough to illuminate the forest floor, but the shadows were still long, stretching in odd angles across the land. As he knelt to inspect the tracks of an elk, something else caught his attention. A deep, unmistakable imprint, the kind only a grizzly bear could leave. His heart skipped a beat. A bear, and not just any bear, a grizzly with its massive paws and razor-sharp claws. The tracks were fresh, the edges of the print still crisp in the mud. David's pulse quickened. He'd encountered bears in the wild before. He'd even had close calls, but never this close to his hunting grounds. The thought of a grizzly so near unsettled him, but he knew better than to panic. Bears were territorial, but they usually avoided humans unless they felt threatened or cornered. He just needed to be careful, he reminded himself. Stay calm. He continued his trek, moving slowly now, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. His mind raced through the checklist of safety measures he'd learned over the years. Make noise, stay visible, keep your distance. He wasn't in any immediate danger, at least that's what he kept telling himself. The forest was vast, and a grizzly would more likely be focused on food than on him. But the deeper David went into the woods, the more he felt like something was watching him. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot made him jump. He wasn't a man prone to fear, but this was different. There was something heavy in the air, something wrong. The bear was close. David heard it first. The low growl vibrated through the air, a deep, primal sound that shook the very trees. The sound was impossible to miss, coming from somewhere in the dense thicket just ahead. David froze, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. The grizzly was nearby, and it was already aware of him. He scanned the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of the massive creature. His heart hammered in his chest, but his mind was sharp. The bear was still out of sight, but it was too close for comfort. He didn't know if it was hungry or just curious, but he wasn't about to wait around to find out. Slowly, he began to backtrack, hoping to put distance between himself and the predator. But then, out of the corner of his eye, something moved. Too fast, too suddenly. David whipped his head toward the sound and his blood ran cold. The grizzly charged. It was a blur of muscle and fury, its massive body hurtling through the trees toward him with terrifying speed. David didn't have time to think. He reached for his bear spray, but it was too late. The bear was already upon him, its claws raking across the air. He raised his rifle, but the grizzly knocked it from his hands before he could even aim. David barely managed to sidestep as the bear lunged again, its massive paws slamming into his side. He felt the weight of the bear's claws tear into his flesh, and pain exploded through his ribs. He stumbled, losing his footing, and the bear pressed its advantage, coming down on him with terrifying force. His mind was a blur of panic and instinct. He tried to bring his rifle to bear, but the bear was too close, too fast. Its teeth sank into his arm, ripping through his jacket and muscle. David screamed, but the sound was lost in the growl of the bear. He reached for his bear spray, but his hand couldn't find it in the chaos. The grizzly was relentless, its jaws snapping, its claws digging into his back as it pinned him to the ground. David fought back, his muscles burning with effort. He swung his fists at the bear, but they were like punches against a wall of steel. His vision blurred with blood, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The bear's weight was suffocating, its breath hot against his face. Desperation surged through him. He had to survive. He had to get away. In a last-ditch effort, David grabbed the flare gun from his pack and fired it into the air. The flare shot up, blazing bright against the sky, and the bear recoiled for just a moment. It was enough time for David to roll out from beneath the beast, his body screaming in protest as he scrambled to his feet. He didn't wait to see what the bear would do. David turned and bolted, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him, his blood soaking his clothes. His ribs ached, his vision was dizzy, but he kept running. Behind him, the grizzly growled, but it didn't chase. The flare had worked. For now, David ran until his legs gave out, collapsing into a small ravine. His breath came in short, painful gasps. He was alive, but barely. The cuts on his arms and torso were deep, and he felt a cold numbness spreading through his limbs. When search teams found him hours later, barely conscious, they rushed him to safety. His injuries were severe, but he survived. The bear, however, was never seen again, and its attack was chalked up to a combination of territorial instincts and a lack of food after a long winter. The incident sparked renewed concern over bear encounters in the region, with authorities issuing stronger guidelines for hunters and hikers. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan had always been a special place for Tyler. At 16, he had already spent a significant portion of his life camping, hiking, and exploring the vast wilderness that stretched across the peninsula. His family often took weekend trips to get away from the bustle of daily life. On this particular trip, Tyler was with a group of friends, all eager for a weekend of camping by a remote lake. It was early summer, the kind of time when the woods were alive with the sounds of birds and insects, and the air was fresh and vibrant with the promise of adventure. The group had set up camp in a quiet, secluded spot near the edge of a small lake. The surrounding woods were dense, a mix of tall pines and thick underbrush that seemed to stretch on forever. Tyler enjoyed the solitude. With his friends around, it wasn't quite as quiet as he would have liked, but it was still peaceful. They had spent the afternoon fishing and swimming, their laughter echoing across the water as the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the camp. That night, after a meal around the campfire, the group settled down to relax. Tyler, however, felt restless. Something in the air felt different, heavier somehow. He stood up from the campfire and stretched, feeling the cool evening breeze against his skin. He told his friends he was going for a walk, and without waiting for a response, he wandered off into the woods. It was a familiar path, a place he'd walked many times before, but tonight, something felt off. He didn't know why, but the woods felt unusually silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The moon was only partially visible through the canopy of trees, casting patches of silver light on the ground. Tyler made his way through the underbrush, moving further away from camp. The sounds of the fire crackling and his friends' voices faded behind him. He didn't really think much about the fact that he had strayed so far from the group. He was used to the feeling of being alone in the woods. The peace of it, the stillness, was something he cherished. But then, there was a sound, something subtle at first, a rustling in the undergrowth. Tyler froze. He was used to animals in the woods, deer, raccoons, maybe the occasional fox. But this sound was different. It wasn't the gentle shuffle of small creatures foraging. It was too heavy, too deliberate. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the snap of a twig underfoot. His pulse quickened. Tyler took a cautious step back, his senses sharpening. He strained to listen, but there was nothing. The rustling had stopped. His mind raced. He told himself it was probably just a deer, maybe even a bear, but it didn't sound like a bear. He shook off the unease creeping up his spine and turned to head back to camp. That's when he heard a low growl, coming from just beyond the trees, a deep rumbling sound that sent a shiver of terror through his body. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as his eyes scanned the shadows. He didn't need to see the bear to know what it was. The low growl, the primal warning. It was a sound that any woodsman knew too well. His heart raced. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to make himself as small as possible, his back pressed against a tree. He hoped the bear wouldn't notice him, that it would just pass by. But then, the bushes ahead of him rustled violently, and the unmistakable shape of a black bear emerged from the shadows. Tyler froze, barely able to breathe. The bear, large and dark, appeared more like a shadow than a living creature as it lumbered toward him, its massive paws thudding heavily on the ground. It wasn't particularly close, but it was moving in his direction, clearly aware of his presence. The bear's head swiveled, its nose twitching as it scented the air. Tyler knew he couldn't stay hidden. The bear had already detected him, and it was moving toward him, not with the curiosity of an animal that had simply stumbled upon a human, but with the focused intent of a predator. Fear surged through him, but Tyler's legs wouldn't move. He tried to recall everything he had learned about bear encounters, all the advice he had heard on his previous trips. Stay calm, don't run, don't make eye contact. But none of it seemed to matter now. Suddenly, the bear lunged. It was too fast, too powerful. Tyler barely had time to react as the bear's massive claws raked across his legs, sending a shock of pain through his body. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the bear's growl as it knocked him to the ground. The force of the attack sent him sprawling into the underbrush, and before he could regain his bearings, the bear was on top of him, its weight pinning him down. The bear's jaws snapped, catching Tyler's arm as he desperately tried to push the beast away. Its teeth sank into his flesh with a sickening crunch, and Tyler gasped in pain, his body instinctively jerking away. But the bear's grip was unrelenting. His vision blurred as he struggled, the pain overwhelming him with each movement. Tyler tried to scream again, but the sound was muffled as the bear's paw swiped across his chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. His body felt like it was on fire. He knew he had to get away, but everything felt so heavy, so impossible. The bear growled, its breath hot and foul against his skin. In a flash of instinct, Tyler reached for his knife, the small survival blade tucked in his belt. His fingers brushed the handle, and with a surge of adrenaline, he gripped it tightly, bringing the blade up as best as he could. He drove it into the bear's side, feeling the resistance of its thick fur and muscle. But the bear seemed only momentarily distracted. It didn't retreat. Desperation clawed at him. In a final frantic move, Tyler managed to bring his knee up into the bear's chest. It staggered back, momentarily thrown off balance, giving Tyler just enough space to scramble to his feet. Blood dripped from his wounds, and the world around him was a blur of pain and terror. The bear didn't follow. Tyler stumbled backward, his breath ragged and shallow. He didn't look back as he ran. The woods blurred around him, his legs moving on instinct alone, the ache in his body forgotten in the wake of pure survival. It wasn't until he burst back into camp, where his friends were frantically searching for him, that he collapsed into their arms, the sound of his own cries echoing in the night. In the summer of 2025, a fishing expedition to the remote wilderness of Hudson Bay seemed like the perfect escape for three seasoned men: Derek, Mark, and Alan. They had all been on numerous fishing trips before, but this one was different. The allure of the cold, pristine waters and the chance to experience the untamed wilderness of Canada's far north was irresistible. Hudson Bay was known not only for its breathtaking beauty, but also for its polar bears, and the men had prepared themselves for the potential dangers of such a remote, wild location. They arrived and quickly set up camp on the edge of the bay, where the low sun of late summer cast long shadows over the ice and water. The air was crisp and clean, and the men wasted no time in setting up their fishing gear. The first few hours passed in relative silence, broken only by the quiet splash of fish being caught and the occasional crack of settling ice. They fished not just for sport, but for the joy of being in such an isolated place. The beauty of the surroundings, almost enough to make them forget the potential dangers that lurked nearby. As the day wore on, the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, but the men continued fishing. They had caught a good number of fish, and their campfire was already crackling, promising a hot meal later in the evening. It was a peaceful moment, one that made them feel even more connected to the land, as though the bay itself was welcoming them into its ancient embrace. But as the men gathered around the campfire to cook their catch, the air shifted. A strange feeling settled over Derek, a sense of being watched. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, hidden in the vast emptiness of the snow-covered landscape. He told himself it was just his imagination, but the unease lingered, gnawing at him as he glanced out across the icy expanse. Then, Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a distant shadow, barely visible against the white canvas. But as he focused, the shape grew larger, moving steadily toward the camp. It was unmistakable, a massive polar bear, its white fur blending almost perfectly with the snowy surroundings, yet its size and movement unmistakable. The bear was heading straight for them. Panic surged through Derek as he turned back to the camp. His mind raced. He knew polar bears were attracted to food, and they had plenty of fish cooking over the fire. The bear had likely smelled it from miles away and was now drawn to the camp, its instincts guiding it toward an easy meal. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he quickly turned to Mark and Alan, but they had already seen the bear, their faces pale with the realization of what was happening. The men immediately sprang into action, grabbing their gear and preparing for the worst. They had rifles and bear spray, but the realization that the bear was already so close made it feel as though they were too late. The bear continued its steady march toward them, its large paws leaving deep imprints in the snow. Its eyes were locked on the camp, its focus unwavering, and there was no mistaking the hunger and curiosity that drove every step. As the bear drew closer, Derek could feel the ground beneath him vibrate with each step the massive animal took. The men moved quickly, heading for their boats on the water, their only hope of escape. The distance to the boats wasn't far, but in the face of such an immediate threat, every step felt like an eternity. Before they could reach the boats, the bear was upon them. It was a blur of power and speed as the bear lunged, its claws extended and its jaws snapping. Derek barely managed to dive to the side, avoiding the bear's initial swipe by mere inches. His heart raced as he scrambled to his feet, trying to gain some distance between himself and the predator. Mark and Alan fired warning shots into the air, hoping to scare the bear off, but the sound seemed only to agitate it further. The bear let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing as it locked onto them with renewed determination. It charged again, its powerful limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. Derek barely had time to react as the bear's claws slashed through the air, just missing him as he ducked. Alan and Mark tried to make themselves appear larger, shouting and waving their arms, but it only seemed to enrage the bear more. Derek reached for the bear spray, his hands shaking as he tried to aim the canister. He fired, releasing a cloud of spray that hit the bear square in the face. The bear recoiled, momentarily stunned, its eyes wide with pain and confusion. It hesitated, giving the men a brief moment to move, but the hesitation was short-lived. With a roar, the bear charged again, faster this time, its massive body cutting through the snow like a freight train. The men ran, their only thought now the boats. They could hear the bear's footsteps pounding behind them, its growls and snarls growing louder as it closed the distance. The cold air burned their lungs as they pushed their bodies harder, their fear propelling them forward. Derek felt his legs weaken with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. There was no other choice. The boats were within reach, the men's salvation. Derek and Mark jumped in first, quickly pushing off into the water. Alan followed, but as he stepped into his boat, the bear lunged at him, its claws raking across the edge of the boat. Alan fell backward, hitting the water with a splash. The bear's jaws snapped shut just inches from him, but Alan scrambled back into the boat, and with one final desperate push, the men were free from the shore. The bear stopped at the water's edge, its eyes watching them for a moment before it turned and disappeared back into the wilderness. Exhausted, battered, and shaken, the men paddled furiously, putting as much distance between themselves and the bear as possible. The adrenaline still coursed through their veins, but as the bear faded from view, they allowed themselves to pause. The danger was over, but the encounter had left them rattled, their minds racing with the realization of how close they had come to death. The land they had entered was not just beautiful, it was unforgiving, and the creatures that roamed it would not hesitate to claim what they desired.